Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Here we go. And I think audio signal flow is coming in. I feel like we're in a great place to begin this episode. And I just wanted to welcome everyone to episode 7 of New Views, I should say. New View Media is our parent company, and New Views is our program that seeks to spark civic imagination, improve our collective messaging to build a more just, equitable, and sustainable planet. We're all in this together, and I truly believe that every conversation helps move the needle. And grounded in these values of respect, honesty, open-mindedness, patience, collaboration, curiosity, experimentation, we're gonna move the needle here to build this better world. And I'm just so grateful for Jimmy joining us today. I'm also thankful for Will for connecting us, Will Brierly, because he's always behind the scenes making an impact. And this is just another example of how he's brought us together for this episode to have a thought-provoking conversation. And I'm just so grateful for all the work you've done to push this movement forward, and your work across messaging and finding that balance between social commentary, which I feel like so many creatives don't necessarily lean into. And I feel like you've really threaded that needle in such an impactful way. Whenever I bring you up to people in this past few weeks, they've been like, wow, Jimmy is awesome at what he does.
Oh, well, that's very nice. Thank you so much for having me. And a big shout out to Will Brierly. Today's his birthday.
Ah, Will.
Yes.
You're tuning in.
Hey, brother Will.
Awesome. So we're just really excited to dive into your story today and kind of experiment with our messaging that, hopefully our audience learns something and engages with us, ask questions along the way if you have anything, team out there. So I just want to start by this, overall question, and your phrase that government matters, that I so strongly align with that value. But your story, how did government make an impact on you growing up and believing that, hey, government was there when you needed it?
Sure. Well, my dad, I grew up in the city of Cambridge, and my dad served in Korea. And when he met my mom and they eventually got married, the U.S. government and the United States Army, and I guess it was the Defense Department, provided what they call the GI Bill. So it was a government program to help all these returning GIs from World War II in Korea with housing assistance, that you could buy a house at a very low interest loan. And it literally, there were hundreds of thousands of people returning from those wars that were eligible for the GI Bill. And the GI Bill helped build the middle class. It helped encourage home ownership. It was the government sort of rewarding people who had served for service. And it was a remarkable thing. It was created by a couple of, business people, but with the government, the best interest of the country in mind. So I believe it was, I think one of the gentlemen, I don't want to misspeak, so I'm not going to say his name. But anyway, when I went to the Kennedy School of Government, I remember reading about this, and I'm reading about these two titans of industry who really knew all about the markets and all about capitalism and housing and everything, who were trying to use the government to create something in the private sector for individuals. And so that's where we grew up. We grew up a mile from here. We're in Kendall Square, Cambridge right now. When we were growing up, this was pretty desolate area. There was one gas station, and it was not a very affluent area or anything. It was, NASA had started to build in this area, but of course you had MIT and you had, Harvard, and eventually it got built up through both government help with the city and the state and the federal government, and also the private sector. So it was a great, private-public partnership right here in Kendall Square, and it's grown to Google's across the street. You're right here.
I love being here. This is, the most innovative square mile in the world, on the planet, I should say, is the phrase.
Right.
And I'm so indebted and grateful for this community. Even this building, 1999, it's been here. MIT technically owns the building, but that combination of collaboration to really build something awesome. I've recently heard the phrase that in order to do anything great, you have to kind of do it together.
Yes.
And it's such a good symbol of this community, Greater Boston, Cambridge, really leaning into let's do this together.
Yes. There's a saying, I think it's an African saying, that if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together.
And
And no, as you mentioned, the the role the government has played. I mean, I went to the Longfellow Grammar School across the street from my house on Broadway, public school, public parks, public roads. My dad was in the cab business, so he owned taxi cabs. So the public roads were essential: bridges, roads, tunnels, transportation infrastructure that was built. The entire highway system was built by Eisenhower back in the 50s, because initially it was a defense idea. So if the U.S. was ever attacked, we could get troops and armaments from one section of the country to the other. But obviously, it had greater civilian use and market use as time went on. But so the government's awesome when they invest properly and for the best interest of the people. Abraham Lincoln had a great quote. He said, "The role of government is to do for people what they cannot do for themselves, but no more." So that was his philosophy. And and when he was, I think he was still in maybe Congress, but he advocated in a big way to clear the Erie Canal of all these stumps and tree stumps. We don't think of tree stumps as being a big impediment to growth now, but at the time, these barges couldn't get up and down the river because all these tree stumps from storms and things were in the river, and they took up a collection and they started taxing people to remove these tree stumps so it would help navigate the barges up and down the river and things like that. And these are just little anecdotes that I've come across over the years, how things have changed and how people have gotten together in a collective way to move the ball forward in the country.
Absolutely love that. I have this thesis that the majority of us have these overlapping values, despite this concept of divide and partisanship. And I feel like government is one of the coolest things humanity has ever invented, to work together. And since that invention, my theory is that there's actually been not 2, but 3 jockeying coalitions competing for a majority, a majority consensus. And my thesis is, there's a movement for money, there's a movement for power, and there's a movement for people. And too often, this movement for people has been left behind while these money and power forces jockey for position. But I'm so encouraged by this democratization of the internet and these growing movements that we're trending back towards this coalition of people. I mean, you look at the first 2 years of the Biden-Harris administration, that was amazing work of government functioning for the people. Like just today, I saw that 122 new train rails are going to be built. I'm like, yes, this is what government can do.
Right.
And I'm just like, want to bring it back to your growth, and where else have you seen government kind of inspire you in terms of like innovation and stuff like that?
Sure. Well, I think in the film, first of all, in terms of the government in the first 2 years of the Biden administration, in terms of bipartisanship, they get this infrastructure bill through.
Yes.
And the people, Mitch McConnell, right? He wants this bridge built down in, I guess it's Tennessee. Is this Kentucky or Tennessee, Mitch McConnell's? I'm not sure.
Kentucky, because he's Rand Paul, I think.
Okay. But anyway, they got this bridge that had been held up for years, and it's over one of the big rivers there. I'm not sure which one, but obviously it's going to help, the red states, the blue states. Yes. It's going to help the country. And, he's hardcore partisan Republican, but he knows where this money and infrastructure is essential for his community and to keep commerce going and people and everything going. So, I mean, that's a beautiful example. On a personal level, growing up in the area, a lot of alcohol, a lot of drugs. And I remember in the 80s, at the end of the 80s, I had lost 3 friends to alcohol and drugs. I personally was going downhill because of those substances in a big way. And I remember calling places for help, detoxes, rehabs, treatment centers, hospitals, and getting the runaround, like there's no beds, there's long lines, you don't have insurance. I ended up calling the Cambridge City Hospital. At the time, they had a federally funded program there called Cahill 3. And I called them. This is a week before Christmas, 1987. And I just said to the man who answered the phone, "I really need help." Without missing a beat, this man said, "You called the right place." And I have never forgot that. When I ran for lieutenant governor, people said, "Why are you running?" That story came back to me. You called the right place. And I went into that hospital, and it was a life-changing event. There was a place to be for 7 days. I got out. I got all that crap out of my system. I moved to New York, and I focused on stand-up comedy and just staying sober. And it was life-changing, put it that way. A year later, to the week that I went into the hospital, I got the greatest Christmas gift any young comic could ever ask for, a spot on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. Now, Tom, I don't want to date myself, okay? But at the time, The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson was the biggest entertainment show on television. Granted, we only had 3 channels, but still. And I don't want to date myself, but the other guest that night was Bob Hope. So I think I just dated myself big time.
Well, it shows how, you've grown and really the impact you've had since then.
Yeah.
And I love that line, like, hey, everyone out there, the radical middle, why a comedian would run for public office. I highly recommend it. That's, I think, one of my favorite lines of the movie. It's like, hey, you've called America.
Yeah.
You've got the right place. You've got the right number.
You called the right place. Right.
We need more of that. And I want to ideate with you throughout this episode.
Sure.
How can we build that reputation for our government, that our civic institution that we all share a part of, that they can trust and build together through that?
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, kind of like, running, like, let's go through lieutenant governor, decision. I think that's a great impetus for that, like, and leading into your career, like, why did you choose, even before that, like, why did you lean into social commentary? Like, why did you think that was an important avenue? And usually I feel like creatives talk and, build programming around what they're passionate. Like, why was that for you?
Absolutely. Well, another example of government is in the 70s, you could go to college at UMass Dartmouth, where I went. It was Southeastern Massachusetts University at the time. It was under $500 a semester. Okay. And you could live down there in the dorms for, compared to now, with a meal plan for under $2,000. I think it was under $2,000 for a semester. It was incredible. Tuition was cheap. The government was trying to encourage college. They were trying to encourage higher education. There was investment in it. It wasn't so much about taking out student loans as it was that it was inexpensive. They obviously still had student loans. But anyway, going away to college was amazing because I just got introduced to all sorts of different people and studied sociology and history and political science. And at the same time, Saturday Night Live was just coming online, right? And we would sit around the dorms and we would watch Saturday Night Live, and we would watch The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, and he would have people like Freddie Prinze on and Rodney Dangerfield and all these comics. And then you had this whole John Belushi Saturday Night Live, the first season. So you had all these young people using comedy and often political satire to make points, to make people laugh. And it was like, wow. And then the movie Lenny came out about Lenny Bruce. And I saw that at college. They had, they showed films at the school. And I saw that movie. And he was another person that really influenced me because I was studying sociology. I was studying history, political science. Growing up in the city of Cambridge, there are so many interesting influences within, a 5 mile square radius, a square 5 square miles that, rich, poor, black, white, Arab, Jew, Asian, Hispanic, all sorts of ethnicities, all sorts of Harvard, MIT, with in between public housing. So MIT is on the border of the local public housing. So obviously it's a low income area with brilliant people. Harvard, the same thing. And so you had a great mix of things. So I took to sociology right away. I got it. They didn't have to explain it to me. It was just, but it was good to have it defined. And the same thing with political science and the same thing with history. And combine that with all those comedic influences that were happening at the same time. I just thought, wow, that would be cool to do comedy. And I didn't, gravitate it right there. But when I got out, up in Niman Square, Cambridge, a Chinese restaurant called the Ding Ho opened up, and they were doing stand-up comedy. And one of my friends from high school was the MC on the Wednesday night, the open mic. So I just had all these ideas swirling around in my head. I was doing song parodies at the time, and I was trying to, do some sort of expression poetry, the cat in the hat. But things like that. And anyway, so this open mic opened up, and I just started going down there and signing up to do the open mic. And I'd go out there like one of the Blues Brothers, right? I'd put a trench coat on. I had a hat, shades. I had a big beard, naturally long hair. I played harmonica, and I was doing all these songs. The test tube baby, I'm a test tube baby. That's why I got the blues. Was a man-made mutation, scientifically abused. I was the miracle of the laboratory. How come I never made 60 Minutes or even the news? So I would do these things, right? And the audience was into it, And I got a job there as the bartender, daytime bartender. And out of that comedy club came a lot of people, Barry Crimmins and Stephen Wright and Paula Poundstone and Dennis Leary and Lenny Clark and Steve Sweeney. And a lot of these folks are still around, and they're all doing really, really well. And a whole industry, organic industry developed. The stand-up comedy industry developed with the role the government played was they had public schools. They had public schools that people could become educated in. They had a middle class of kids and lower middle class and upper middle who were educated, who had the ability to get on stage and take a risk and try to make something up creatively. And they weren't necessarily educated in those fields, but they were educated in reading and literature and essay writing and things like that, just common public school education. But they were able to transfer those skills. Jerry Seinfeld's a great example, and all the comics in New York, but it was very organic. It wasn't planned. And the audiences were reacting to what they were seeing. And the club scene just developed here in Boston, San Francisco, Los Angeles, New York, and the whole scene just developed organically. And it was fairly inexpensive for the club owners to put on, because they were basically bars that's, establishments, clubs, nightclubs. All you need is a microphone and some lights and a stage, and you could put on a show. And so that's how it kind of developed. And there were no rules, and you were free. And we live in a free country, going back to government and the First Amendment. And what makes America a really great country is the ability to express oneself freely. And there were no rules. There were no language rules. You could drop the F-bomb, and unlike Lenny Bruce, when he was dropping it or getting in trouble, and there was people like George Carlin and all these people that came down the pike. So anyway, that's just some examples of how I got into it.
I see a lot of similarities to what's developing now through the internet. This freedom to create is now evolving through a publicly created institution through our investment into the internet. The U.S. investment led to this beautiful thing that we're talking to our audience.
The Defense Department.
Yeah.
And we're still defending you.
Yeah. And I am, it's so cool to hear how this culture was created with a lot of, innovative minds. And I hope that in this studio here that we're developing and trying to bring a lot of creatives together, hopefully, a few decades down the road, we have a similar story and people who are making an impact. And I mean, I feel like we're storytelling creatures. I was just having a conversation with a friend before this, where we can talk data points. I feel like the data points are irrefutable about where we need to go to a degree and what needs to be done from a policy perspective. But unless we tell stories that engage people, which I think you're so great at, we can't get people to buy into, hey, let's do this together. Let's experiment. So, going into the story of your lieutenant governor run, what sparked that? What did you learn from that? Because I feel like that's an awesome evolution to going from creative to hey, I feel I have the courage to go help people.
Right. Well, what happened was, because I was in the social commentary vein, of stand-up comedy, trying to be funny, but also to do it well, social commentary, you got to know what you're talking about. You have to do research, and you have to, ideally, you're presenting a point of view, but it's based on fact, so you're not just talking about somebody's hairdo or something, or you're talking about the policies, government policies, and things like that. So anyway, after years of doing that, I at one point I applied to the Kennedy School, and I got into the Kennedy School of Government, which was great. And when I came out of there, I said, I need to do something more than just tell jokes. I just felt most of my classmates were going back into government service or some sort of public service. One of my classmates is now the president of Moldova, Maya Sandu, yes, right on the border with Ukraine and Russia, yeah. But that was that level of, and many were from the armed services or national security or nonprofits and here in state and local government. So anyway, there was just this feeling of participating. You should be doing something more. And anyway, that's when I started Humor for Humanity. And I did that for a few years. But this is interesting that you asked that question. In 2016, I was trying to help Hillary do what I could. I always tried to get involved around the elections. And my job was to one of my jobs was to hold a sign. And it's always funny because before Hillary ran, I was holding a sign once in Central Square to get people on election day to the polls. And I'm out there with the sign, let's do this, people, let's do this. And people are ignoring me, you know, and I start making things up. Listen, you kids, I did not risk my life at the Battle of the Bulge so people could not vote on election day, right? They're walking past me. 2 hours later, I get even more crazy. I'm just trying to amuse myself because it's a long day. You're out there 8 in the morning till 8 at night with a sign, let's do this, let's get to the polls. And I'm up there, listen, you kids, I did not take a musket ball to the knee at the Battle of Bunker Hill so people could not vote on election day. This kid comes up to me, about 19 years old, dead serious, looks me in the eye and says, thank you for your service. Now, Tom, I know I'm getting older, but 241. So anyway, so I was engaged in all of this. And then when Hillary lost in 2016, I really thought a lot about Donald Trump. And I thought about how he was an entertainer and he was able to message in short, simple messages. Because people say, how did he win? One of the ways, short, simple messages, 3 words: build the wall, drain the swamp, lock her up, make America great, 3 words. And I always felt like, you know what? We have our own 3 words. We have our own 3 words. Feed the hungry. Not only the people hungry for food, the people hungry for opportunity. House the homeless. Not only the people walking the streets, sadly, many of our veterans, but also the people who work every day and are trying to find a safe, affordable place to live and raise a family. House those homeless and heal the sick, not only physical illness, but mental illness, and welcome the stranger. Welcome the stranger. So America continues to welcome people into this great country rather than pushing people out. And this is the message of America. This is the message. This is the human message. Feed the hungry, house the homeless, heal the sick, welcome the stranger. And just for our Boston audience, fix the T.
Yes.
Fix the trains, ladies and gentlemen, because I always felt if John F. Kennedy could inspire a generation to go to the moon 50 years ago, we can get a train to go to Springfield.
I saw that the Springfield station is being developed to maybe get that.
Yeah.
And I've inherited this this mission from Dukakis to get the north-south rail link done as well. You know, I went and interviewed him at his house, and I love that conversation. And it's just so obvious. Like someone said, it's criminal that it wasn't part of the Big Dig project, you know, and that should have been it. But, you know, I am so grateful that you had the courage to stand up and be like, hey, I'm good at this messaging, you know, and you can bring people together in a really great storytelling.
Yeah. You know, what's interesting about that? You mentioned courage. There was a lot of fear about running for office, a lot of fear. Would it be taken seriously? You know, what if I win? What if I lose? What, you know, what are you going to do if you lose? What are you going to do if you win? All these things going through my head. And I heard I heard it someplace, I don't know where it was, but you mentioned courage. And the phrase was, what would you do if you weren't afraid? What would you do if you weren't afraid? If it wasn't for fear, what would you try? And it spoke to me. And I said, you know what? If I wasn't afraid, I would run for office. I would run for office. And of course, there's a big spiritual component to the whole recovery movement. And so, prayer is a big part of my life. Helped me to stop drinking and using drugs. And so that I no longer necessarily am struggling with that, but there's other things that you can use prayer and spirituality for. Fear, it is one of them. Resentment, all these things that can, self-pity, all these things that can hold us back from fulfilling our potential, and asking, in my case, I just ask God, help me, help me with these situations, help me with these challenges, help me with these ideas, help me to fulfill my potential as you would have me fulfill my potential.
The values, I grew up, going to Catholic school, BC High. And, the serenity prayer was above my bed. And
Right.
I loved hearing that in your documentary, the serenity to know the things that we cannot change, the courage to change the things we can,
Right.
and the wisdom to know the difference.
Right.
And that has really been a huge part of my growth. And I'm so grateful you saw the opportunity to make a difference, because I believed in you. And I was right beside you, and to a degree, doing videography for Bob Massey and his governor campaign. And, I'd love to learn about what you learned from that campaign, so that we can inspire, hopefully, others listening out there to run for office as well, because it's an important responsibility, and there's a lot of learning lessons.
Right. Well, one of the things is, and you mentioned the spirituality, greater people than certainly me or you, or more consequential people, have always leaned on that dimension. And there's nothing wrong with being afraid. The thing is to overcome it. And one of the things you can use is a connection with the higher power. There's a great chapter on Martin Luther King's. I have a book of all his essays and writings, and he does one on fear, and how he's in his house, and this is like the late 50s, early 60s. He got death threats all the time. He's in his house, and someone calls up and leaves a horrible message about, we're coming after you, N-word, you're dead, all this stuff. And he was overcome with fear. And he says in the book, in his essay, I just started praying, and I got out his Bible, and he read some verses in the Bible or whatever, and the fear started to lift, and he was able to go to the next level. He was able to do what he wanted to do, and the fear was taken away. But in terms of what did I learn from the process of running, I really had and I still have it, is a newfound respect for the people who were running for office, regardless of the side of the aisle. It's a huge commitment, and it's a heavy toll on your personal life, and it's a heavy toll on your family's life, because it involves everybody. We had our campaign headquarters in our basement, as you saw in the film. Yeah. And the idea that you're making this commitment, and it's really a 24/7 job. Even school committee or city council or anything, local politics, state politics, federal, it's intense. And those people on the top, I can't imagine the intensity that they have to always be on. The weight, the decisions, the public scrutiny, the public decisions, the weighing options, trying to do the right thing, satisfy your constituents, raise money, unfortunately, all these competing forces that you have to deal with to get stuff done. Then you got to work with other people, the other side of the aisle, so it's not like, so that's why people sometimes get frustrated with government, that it takes so long to get a bridge made or something. There's so many, it's designed with checks and balances.
Right. I interviewed post-election Bob and Dr. Don Berwick as well. I'm a huge fan. And I asked them, what did they learn too? And the big takeaway was Dr. Berwick was talking about how over 50% of his time was dedicated to raising money. He had to be on the phone. He had to do meetings with donors and all that stuff instead of talking about the issues. Whereas I feel like now the grassroots have grown, where I feel like Senator Sanders and AOC, like they only take, small donations from like grassroots, which I think is really cool. But I mean, I would love to get your perspective on how we get big money out of politics. Cause I think like someone once asked me, what's the one thing you would change? And I was like, well, I think if we got big money out of politics, that could shift the needle. Like the first video campaign I ever volunteered for was to overturn Citizens United through a constitutional amendment. And I'm just curious, like your perspective on big money in politics and how that kind of maybe distorts who ends up getting to office.
Yeah, well, it certainly plays a big role, and it certainly is a huge role in people's time commitment. And I think I worked on the Clean Elections campaign I think it was coming after some savings and loan scandals back in the 90s with John McCain, and they had a McCain-Feingold bill, campaign finance reform, eventually became a reality. But it passed the ballot in Massachusetts. 61% of the people voted for public financing of campaigns. 61%. The legislature would not fund it.
Whoa.
The legislature would not fund it. Heavily Democratic legislature would not fund it. And so then they said the people really didn't know what they wanted, because once you get there and you've accepted all this money and you've benefited from the system and played the game to get there, now you're asking these people to forego that system,
balance it out,
and to forego that and just run without asking people for money. So I think that's part of the biggest problem, I think, is once you get there, I think it's very hard to go back and say, well, that system screwed up. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they would gladly do it, but I mean, that's one thing, because the legislature wouldn't do it here in Massachusetts. And then 2 years later, they put it on the ballot, and it was kind of a sleeper issue, and it got in there and had huge public support. I think it was 61 or maybe even 66% of the people passed it, clean elections. And then 2 years later, they put it back on the ballot, but the opposition got a lot of money, and they said, okay, let's go crush this. And I think it ended up losing on the ballot the second time. So, and the money forces put it in. The people who have the money want it like that, because they want their voices heard, and they want their particular agenda to be given attention. And if I were running like AOC or Bernie, I would listen to everybody and say, you know what, you're a tobacco company. Okay, you want to hear your opinions? I'll listen to your opinion. Tell me why. It's good for everybody, or whatever. Or people have a right to smoke, or whatever it is, or gambling, or alcohol, or whatever it is. Listen to it and weigh the pros and cons of those issues. I believe everybody should have a seat at the table. But when someone has $1 million and somebody else has $50, that's not the same.
Right. You can't coalition build if people's voices aren't treated equally.
Exactly. And so anyway, so I think that's a big part of the problem.
And I was really excited for ranked choice voting too. And that was another issue that was like so close and didn't happen. I think ranked choice voting would be at least kind of democratize the primary system a little bit, and I think like that's the primaries to me. It's like, I don't know. I think that you guys would have had a much better chance against Governor Baker. And I think a lot of people probably saw that, but like primaries it's such an interesting system where you have to engage people so much more almost to get them out. It's already hard enough to get people to participate.
Right.
But you did an amazing job. I mean,
well, thank you. And it's interesting. One of the things just on a national level that makes it really tough in America, in American democracy, I've heard quotes that saying, if we were starting all over, this is not how we would do it. There's 50 states. Each state has how many counties. Every county has their own election rules. What time's the polls open? What time the polls close? When can you register? When's the deadline? Some people can register to vote the day of in New Hampshire. Some people it's a month earlier. So it just seems like such a hodgepodge. And it would be great. One unifying thing we could have in the country is like let's get some election rules out there that we can all agree on,
Yeah.
and so that's like one thing, but that's a heavy lift,
Right.
because all these little, every state has their own way, like just New Hampshire have to be first because their legislature said in the 50s or 60s, we have to be first. And like the whole country is supposed to go to New Hampshire. And I love going to New Hampshire, but wouldn't it be cool if Mississippi could go first? Or
Yeah.
Michigan or Missouri or Ohio or another part of the country, and you could rotate it around the country. So the national emphasis is on a particular region of the country and not the same region every year, every 4 years.
We want
Things like that.
We want people to feel like their vote matters.
Yeah.
And I think like we've come to this, I mean, even if we could, I mean, the Electoral College to me is created to protect slavery. Like I think that there's some type of, we have to evolve past that. And that's going to take some serious conversations. When someone wins the popular vote by 7 million, 3 million, then 7 million.
Right.
I mean, I don't like critiquing as much, but there hasn't, that, whatever you want to call that movement, hasn't won the popular vote since, for 20 years, really.
Right.
And yet there's still a rotation of presidencies, which doesn't really feel just to me. It feels undemocratic. But we could balance federal or Massachusetts next. I think let's start local and we'll go federal.
Okay.
Like in which ways, I mean, this beautiful Commonwealth has usually led the country forward. I think like that was a huge thing that I love from both you and Bob's campaign, is that we have a responsibility to lead. And I felt like the Baker administration was a manager. And I just didn't think that we lived up to our potential as a state. And that's what got me so inspired. I think Governor Healey's doing a much better job at that. But at the same time, like, where would you want to see our state lead better, do better, innovate better? Like what public institutions, what civic institutions in our state do you think we should focus on improving?
Well, one thing we've done well, I'll start with all the positive.
Yeah.
We've done really well with the gun safety. We are the safest state because of people in this state that realize that, there's ways to keep guns out of the hands of people. We have background checks. We have red flag laws. And that's been a concerted effort over the last 20 years. And you probably are familiar with John Rosenthal with Stop Handgun Violence. And he had that big billboard on the Mass Pike that used to say about gun violence with the statistics, this horrible statistics of how many people are shot every day, how many kids are dying from gun violence. Anyway, so we've done really good with that. We've done really good with, our education system. We've had education reform back in the 90s where they try to balance off the amount of money spent to schools. So ideally, the quality of a child's education doesn't depend on the property values of the parents' home.
Yes.
But for years, that's what it was all about. You got high property values, you're going to have more money for your local school. And if you don't have high property values, you're going to have less money, which is less teachers, larger classrooms, less services, etc. So I think we've done a good job with that. And we're always trying to improve in the state. One of the things that I would say that we could do better on, obviously the public transportation has been tough because we have the oldest public transportation system. We had the first subway in Boston, and it's still there. And then they would add an addition system over here 5 miles away, which was a different system. This is just my reading on it, what's happened. And so the dimensions of those trains were different than the trains over here. And those trains were different in the tracks and everything. So foresight, of course, is hindsight is 2020. But I mean, we obviously got to improve our public transportation. But I think one of the biggest issues for this country in our state is the recovery issue. It's a life and death issue.
Yeah.
It's a life and death issue. We made a lot of progress, but there's got to be a way to take people who want help in real time and get them into a place where they can be away from alcohol, away from drugs, in a safe environment that they can start to recover if they have the willingness to recover.
Right.
If they have the willingness. And that's something that's not only important here in Massachusetts, we've done a much better job than many states, but nationally. And it's a unifying thing, and it's across both parties, rich, poor, doesn't matter. And I think that both the Republican Party and the Democratic Party have really high level examples of people in the immediate family of the first family. If you look at Jerry Ford, and Betty Ford was a groundbreaker in terms of coming out about her addiction to prescription drugs, and I believe alcohol as well. There was obviously the Joe Biden's son, Hunter, with his problems. Donald Trump's brother died from alcoholism. His older brother, Fred. And so there's these examples of the Kennedy family had their own curses with alcoholism. So there's these examples on Jimmy Carter's brother, Billy Carter, was an alcoholic, and it really, was terrible for his family, but also it hindered Jimmy's ability to serve, or to, people would say, well, you can't. I heard a guy say to me, Jimmy Carter, why are you voting for him? He can't even control his own brother. But as if you can control another person who's under the influence of alcohol and drugs. You can't. But if they want help, you can provide a place for them to get help. And that's, I think, what we got to do. Another area, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, no.
Yeah. So I'm just saying there's a potential for bipartisan help on that particular issue.
Yes. And it's too many deaths. I mean, I feel like some of the movies and shows out there bring a lot of attention to it, which is awesome. We have to get that. We have to get policy passed.
Yeah. I'm
curious about Massachusetts' recent policy of psychedelic recovery for addiction. Mm-hmm. And we don't have to dive into that, but I'm just curious because the research is promising as a way to recover from addiction, but that opens up other things. So, I think I'm going to vote yes on that question, but I like the ballot initiatives across states in terms of bringing it back to Tip O'Neill, all politics local. If we can use Massachusetts as an innovation engine to test stuff, mm-hmm. I even really want to dive into can Massachusetts be a leader for Medicare for all? Mm-hmm. I would be curious at some point how we could dive into that. I feel a responsibility that we could do that as being the architect of the last national healthcare bill.
Right.
But I'm, there's a lot of room for experimentation.
Oh, yeah.
And I love your line that healthcare is a national defense issue. And this is one of those perfect examples of what you're talking about is we have to prioritize healthcare over other things.
Yeah, it's a national defense.
Yes.
Right. And to your point about Massachusetts being an innovator in terms of healthcare, there's a gentleman at MIT, I'm going to hope I can remember his name. It's not Simon Johnson, who just won the Nobel Prize, but I can't remember his name. He was a big advocate for the public option in Massachusetts. Okay. And Dukakis was a big advocate for the public option. And that's like a stepping stone to something, okay, if you're a taxpayer, and if the average cost of whatever the cost of Medicare is, $5,000 a year to cover a family of four or something, whatever it is, be able to buy into it, buy into that system, so you don't have to necessarily have private insurance, which is more expensive. So there's things like that we could do here. Another thing is the immigration issue. That's a huge issue, and and people see these scenes about the border, and hordes of people coming across, and the chaos. It looks horrible. It's terrible optics, and it's not good for anybody. And we still have to have empathy for the people who are trying to come. And one of the reasons that people are allowed to claim asylum is because in World War II we turned away people coming from Nazi Germany. Right. There was a boat of Jewish refugees called the USS St. Louis, I believe it was. That was docked in Cuba, tried to get into Florida. And the president, I think it was Truman at the time, said no. But a lot of the rhetoric was the same. They're bringing disease. They don't speak the language. They're going to be a hindrance on the schools. You know, all the reasons why you can't take 1,000 people fleeing, you know, Nazi Germany into America was enough to send them back. And they went back to Europe, and many had to go back, and many died in the concentration camps. And so, but and after World War II, we changed that narrative. They said, that's never going to happen again in America. If somebody gets here and is seeking asylum, we're going to take them in. So that's one of the reasons why we have these asylum laws, which is good. But so we have to explain that to people, and we have to set up a way to bring people in and take care of people, and maybe even starting in their own countries, helping there, you know, most people want to stay in their own country, you know. And the whole issue of war in general, and how that's driving people from Venezuela and these other countries south of the border, and the drug cartels and all that. And what is our role in that? We're selling guns in this country, and a lot of these guns are ending up in the hands of the cartels, you know, and it's driving people here, and the drug trade. So there's a lot of issues we got to get our hands on. Yeah.
You drew a great line there, and maybe I can draw a great line, or a line here as well, which is like, I think strongly there's no such thing as an illegal human. Humans are humans.
Yeah.
We're all on this planet together.
Right.
You know, I understand that centuries have drawn nationalized borders, but we share this beautiful planet. I think that I loved your line of that, like, why are we critical of people who want to come here to work? Like, I just think that, like, oh, we're pushing, like, just come and bring and work hard, and that's the American dream. Like, I think there's literally no one here that didn't, besides the few Native American, you know, culture. Everyone has come to America and built it. And I love that Reagan line, as much as I am so critical of Reagan, where you can go to France, but you can't become a Frenchman. You can go to other countries, but you can't. But you can come to America and become an American. And that intentionality, like, I'm going to go there for opportunity. That is what our country is founded on. Let us make sure we have that welcoming culture. And, you know, bringing it to war, I truly believe that we can eventually build a planet without war. I think it's a long stretch. We have to put in decades of work, but I think it's possible. And I think that you have to talk about it. You know, we can get there. I really do. And then third, to bring it all, is like, well, because for a century we've burned fossil fuels and we've heated the planet, this intensification of our weather patterns is going to cause the most migration of all time with these climate catastrophes. And we have to make sure we have a government that can work to respond and be there for people during them, because this is something that's completely was in our control. We didn't address it. Now it's out of our control, and we have to prepare for it. I mean, every day that we continue to spew fossil fuels is getting the issue worse. And I really loved your concept of this clean economy that we should really lean into. And I'm curious if you've, any thoughts on what we've talked about before?
Yeah, well, I mean, when you said mass migration, my aunt lives in Phoenix, and I was just down there on Monday night doing a fundraiser for the Harris Waltz ticket, and with my friend Paula Poundstone, great comedian, and we've known each other forever. And I called my aunt to see if she would be interested in coming to the show. And she had COVID and she couldn't come, but she said, Jimmy, I'm thinking about moving. She goes, it was over 110 degrees for like, I don't even know how many months of the year it is in Arizona. And I said, you know, Betty Lou, that is just so symbolic of what's going to happen on a massive scale. She's just a single person, widow, her husband has passed, but she's going to move from Arizona to some place that's a little bit cooler, and because of the climate. And that's just one person, and she's not of means, but I can't take the heat. She was working at Home Depot. She said, I'd have to be out there at noon every day. And, you know, it's an outside job. She was working in the gardening section. So, but that's just like one example of somebody that's going to move. And that's going to be repeated on a massive scale.
Right.
It's going to be huge. So we got all these issues coming down the pipe. And we need people who want to solve problems, not just represent groups of industries that don't want to solve the problem.
Right. We have to sacrifice profit for problem solving.
Yeah, it's gotta, yes. And that's why it's so important to vote. That's why the elections are so important. That's why that's why government is so important. You need people who like the government in the government.
Yes.
And if you don't like the government, do something else.
Well, I was interviewing someone, or one of our clients runs this Model UN group, and I was part of Model UN. I loved it.
Mhm.
Really impacted me. I went to DC for the first time in school, so I love those types of organizations. And he was like, one of the scariest parts of Project 2025 is the concept of removing 4,000 plus civil servants from our government,
Mhm.
basically enabling it inept. You know, it's like, imagine that institutional knowledge loss to like remove that.
Right.
It's just like wows me. I'm like, wow, I'm glad I asked what what don't I know about?
Mhm.
But I think like setting us up for the federal part of the conversation, I hope that these years are symbolic. We have 1932, 1980, 2024. In my Tip O'Neill policy class, somewhere on this book, I learned about the realignment years of our country. 1932, New Deal. That era was amazing. I mean, we hear this "Make America Great Again." That was when America was its best, when we invested in the middle class and we had amazing social programs. 1980, Make America Great Again. The same campaign slogan, I think bookending this era to a degree of like deregulate, trickle down economics.
Right.
I think that experiment has failed. I think that does not work. So much data around it. But now this era of Vice President Harris, I mean, even the Biden administration should be included in this. These,
Obama.
Grateful for, yes, Obama too. I think like there has been a growth trajectory towards it that sets us up for this moment now.
Right.
Being out there on the campaign trail, what messages would you say to people who are either undecided or haven't voted yet? What message is resonating with you the most?
Well, the messages that are resonating with me the most are the importance of truth and the importance of facts and the importance of honesty in the communications. I am astounded and so disappointed that somebody, and not just the former president, but there is so much information that comes over the public airwaves that is half truths, some truth, false. There's no consequences. There's no consequences for it. And you have the former president that his ascendance was based on largely his first foray into politics was about Obama's birth certificate being a fake and sowing the seeds of disinformation and suspects and suspicion with the public and the demonization of the Muslim Barack Hussein Obama, and all of that, and how it went unanswered, and how he was just able to get onto all these shows and just talk about Hillary Clinton, labeling her as crooked Hillary, and lock her up. And I just say that one of the things we have to do with our media and the web, and we have to figure out a way to discern what is true and what is false, and have some sort of consequences for false speech. I'm not saying misspeaking, and I'm not saying making a mistake or factually incorrect about a statistic, but the repeating of lies over and over and over again that are obviously not true, but no consequences. So it's a huge loophole. And the former president found the loophole and he drove a bus through it, and he continues to drive a bus through it. The challenge is it's good for business because these media companies are businesses and their profit model is based on people paying attention. And if something sounds crazy and people pay attention, eating cats and dogs, immigrants eating cats and dogs, that is the biggest takeaway from the first debate. I mean, the Harris, that's like the biggest takeaway. And that's why they do it, because it's nuts, but everybody knows it. And so the business model is based on startling people rather than informing people. And so we have a lot of work to do with our news, but we also have this great opportunity to adhere to the First Amendment, but also the First Amendment for things that are true and real, and not just for, not for, and some sort of consequences for things that aren't repeatedly, deliberately trying to disinform uninformed people. I don't even know if that's a word, uninformed.
We're lowering their intellect through
mislead people.
Yes, mislead. Yes. My trajectory of it is like I took a course on talk radio back in the day, and that being like the source of a lot of, the Rush Limbaughs, like, that was like a new medium at the time. And that talk radio, those fear-mongering voices kind of stirred up that movement that to a degree propelled the Reagan era, that to a degree propelled the Fox News era, that to a degree is propelling the Trump era. It's like these seeds have been sown. So it's like, how do we almost reseed and re-engage people that, hey, like, let's tone down the not even tone down the rhetoric, because it's an important moment, but like reseed the facts, reseed the hope, reseed the concept of working together.
Right. You want differences of opinion.
Yes.
Okay. And you need solutions. And, there's two sides, and people are on, some side is, more pro-business, and some side is more pro-government. But just, if somebody's presenting me with a case of facts of why my ideas are wrong, and I'm a public servant, that's going to help me. I don't want to be on the wrong side. If you're going to tell me that marijuana is harmless, and I don't want to legalize marijuana, and they're telling me it's harmless, and they're right that it's harmless, then I should be on that side. Or if the opposite is true, then I should be on that side as a public servant, right. Or whatever the issue is. But to intentionally mislead people is criminal. And as I say in the film, I think I do, about treating political speech like commercial speech. Yes. Because commercial speech, you cannot lie about the contents of a product or the effectiveness of a product on television. It is the Federal Trade Commission will enforce penalties if you lie about it. And I make the point in the film that the Federal Trade Commission fined Kellogg's $5 million for lying about the effects that fructose has on children. And I'm saying, if the Federal Trade Commission can fine Kellogg's $5 million for lying about the effects that fructose has on children, why can't we get the Federal Trade Commission to fine pundits and politicians and media outlets for the effects that bullshit has on adults?
I completely agree. We have to develop a system for it.
And I think we can. And just look at the debates. Right. And I don't want to go too long, but I think the debates are a really good example. I was thinking, why not have fines for disinformation during the debates? You have Biden and you have Trump debating. Trump had something like 29 false or misleading statements during the debate. Biden had, I think, 11 or 12. Okay. The advertising rate on that debate on CNN was someplace in the vicinity of $300,000 to $500,000 for an ad, right? So for like a 30-second ad, that's what it was costing. So if you take a nugget of disinformation, and that's a $300,000 value that's going out into the public consciousness, $300,000, right? I'm saying, not in real time in the debate, but add it up. Create debates that have like winners and losers formulas. Did you answer the question? Did you stick to your time? Did you, and were you factually correct? And if you have 10 false, misleading statements that you've repeated in other debates or other forums, find the person, not 300,000, triple damages. Triple damages, because as getting back to the money in politics, that's what they pay attention to. They pay attention to money. And if you had triple damages for false statements during a presidential debate, sorry, it would be a public embarrassment. It would discredit the candidate further, regardless of which side. And we would get $300,000. We have $900,000 per lie for the American taxpayer or whoever was hosting the debate. And so that's one thing I've been thinking a lot about. And the other thing is elevating public television and public radio. So it is, because that's not the private sector, that's public, and that's the public good. And balancing out that. The reason talk radio took off like it did, and it was all one-sided, they got rid of the fairness doctrine.
Yes.
The fairness doctrine. And that was put in right when radio came on and right when television came online. Well, you just can't have one side of somebody saying something and no rebuttal. So they balanced it. So if so-and-so comes on from the Democratic Party and says this about whatever policy, you need somebody else from the Republican Party saying the counter argument. So the viewer or the listener can make up their mind. And I think we could do that with public television and public radio for the public good. But so we got some models to recreate and things like that. But I think we can do it. And I just think that the internet, just like you have laws on the highway, the information highway is going to need some sort of rules and regulations.
I completely agree. And I love those innovative policies, because it does come down to policy at the end of the day, is we have to come up with something. I love that idea of a 21st century fairness doctrine, or a fact check or some type of thing. I mean, I even loved the idea of like doubling down on like a PBS, getting a reinvigoration into these public airwaves. I think that we can do that.
Because that's their mission. Yes. That's their operating principle, public television. The network television is not, their operating thing is not, it's shareholder, it's for the shareholders.
That's why I want to build my media company into a cooperatively owned business model. And I think I heard that. I think Senator Sanders introduced some type of like, hey, let's buy back these newsrooms to like make sure that the journalists own a percentage of it, rather than it being a top-down model, a bottom up, reinvigorating the journalists. I thought that was a really cool idea.
Bernie Sanders came up with that?
I know that there was a policy as part of the platform, that I thought was pretty cool. And we got to double down on that, I think. And, I'm optimistic that this election is going to go in a way that creates a better world. And if that does, that means that I think that it's more likely that there's going to be people who listen to these ideas, which I'm really excited by.
Yeah. And it's not necessarily, whatever happens, Trump has showed us, where we need work.
Yes.
He showed us, he's done a service inadvertently to our media, because he's showing us that, oh boy, you can get away with stuff and there's no consequences. And we can't have a long-term society based on things that aren't true. And so I think regardless of what happens on election day, we still have to do a lot of work and still stay engaged. It's like, I forget who said it, Winston Churchill or somebody, that it's constant vigilance. A democracy is constant vigilance. And I think Ben Franklin said, we have a republic if you can keep it. After they signed the Continental Congress, when they created the Constitution.
Very well said, and great historical reference. I always like to bring it together with, like, for our audience, is there any media outlets right now or any sources of news information that you really trust to get, facts, to get more information, to be thought-provoking?
I try to pay attention to the PBS nightly news.
Very cool.
Yeah, they have the BBC that comes on right after that here in the Boston area. BBC's got a great worldview. They have reporters on they're heavily financed by the UK, PBS NewsHour, it's good. NPR, I listen to that. I listen to a lot of podcasts. I get a lot of information there's some great podcasts out there of serious people who get together and have serious discussions, and they're very frank on these podcasts. One of them is Politicology. It's all political. Have you heard of them?
No.
Politicology. It's all former Reagan and Republicans and Bush White House operatives who reject the Trumpism, and they're smart. They're patriotic, and they are big. They founded the Lincoln Project. Some of those folks are there, and the Lincoln Project. They're basically people who were in the Republican Party who came up through it, Reagan people, and have rejected it. And they're fairly young, and they're really energetic and bright, and they're trying to. They're all pulling for Harris because, and for me to hear people who were once one way and now have had a change of heart, to me that's that gives great credibility to what they're saying, because it's really hard to switch gears and criticize your own team when you have such a an adherence to that personal history.
Takes courage.
It takes courage. It takes courage, and that's what it's about. It really is. And I mean, anyway, so that's one source of news. And there's the Lincoln Project, and there's people like that I get it. And I listen to talk radio, and I watch Fox when I can, and I listen to try to get a diversity of opinions and go, okay, where are they right and where are they wrong? And again, when you see some things when they're focusing on the border, Fox, and they got a helicopter going, and you see people running, you go, you know what, this is chaotic. And that's what's driving the people's anti-immigration sentiment, and so that's helpful to me to see. I can see why people think that way, but I wouldn't see that if I wasn't watching that or listening to some of the talk radio, which I listen to, and hearing the arguments and familiarizing myself with other arguments that aren't necessarily, if I only listen to people that I know and I agree with, I'm not going to hear those arguments or those points of view.
I think that's a great way to kind of almost wrap, but I wanted you to talk about the documentary a little bit and your strategy of release. I love kind of learning about how you're keeping this open and using it as a means to engage others about hey, let's talk about these issues that are very middle-esque, that are very grounding. I just want to have our audience kind of a call to action on why the documentary is being released in its innovative strategy it is now.
Sure. Well, the documentary is called Jimmy Tingle, The Radical Middle. Why would a comedian run for office? It's based on my historic 2018 campaign for Lieutenant Governor of Massachusetts. And we did a show at the Sanders Theater, and we filmed it. And then we went into lockdown, and I wasn't planning on making a film, but 4 years later, we just put the footage together, did some interviews, and we made a film. And it's on YouTube. It's free. It's free on my website, jimmytingle.com. You just go there, you click it, and you can watch it. It's 50 minutes long, and it's basically what motivated me to run, some of the issues that I care about, and going to a higher, I would say a higher, more spiritual level when it comes to solving problems and not giving up hope, because this country and this world have been in some hairy situations before, and we have come out of them. But it always takes leadership, it takes faith, it takes courage. But we're going to be okay. That is my takeaway, that we're going to be okay, but we're going to need help. So God, help us.
Well, I appreciate the work that you've done to release this in a way that's engaging and helping educate people and encouraging action with them, and using you as an inspiration. And, even just tying back to the speech last night, outside the White House, I truly believe, I'm so proud of our country in so many ways. And I think leading with that, I'm critical of our country because I'm proud of it. And I think we can do better. And, it's this concept of that this is the coolest experiment that humanity has ever created, this country of very diverse people coming together to experiment and build policy and grow together across such a large space, like this continent, this is so amazing of an experiment. And I think that we have a next level to unlock. And I'm hopeful that we can do it together through conversations like this.
Great.
And I just wanted to, let you end with, is there anything else you would tell our audience in terms of getting involved or, going out there and making an impact?
Yeah, I would say, hello, audience. I'd just say, do what you can, where you can, how you can, when you can, because faith without works is dead. So we can build, in the words of Abraham Lincoln, that more perfect union, and the government of the people and by the people and for the people shall not perish from the earth.
Beautiful words to live by and be inspired by. So I just want to thank everyone for tuning in. and helping build this better world together. I know that we can do it. I'm optimistic that programs like this can move the needle towards a more just, equitable, and sustainable world. So thank you, Jimmy, for joining me today.
My pleasure, Tom.
Really
Thank you so much.
Everything you've done to
it's my pleasure, and congratulations on a great new studio and a great new show. I love it. And what a crew. What a crew you have. Geniuses, each and every one of them.
I completely agree, wholeheartedly. I hope that more programs like this come out of this space and that we truly can make an impact on the world. So thank you all for tuning in. And until next time, in solidarity, thank you so much.